When I first started producing heavy music, I got lost a lot of the time. And all my mixes came out sounding muddy, small, and disjointed. And I watched YouTube video after YouTube video, but nobody was showing me how to stitch the entire process together. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to focus on the entire process of mixing a single metal song, starting with raw DI tracks and MIDI, and finishing with a professional sounding metal mix. I'm Dave. I'm the producer at Very Friendly Studios. We're based here in Brooklyn, and we're currently moving into a new space. It's going to be the largest live recording space in all of Brooklyn. And until we get there, I'm doing video series here, which is where I originally learned how to mix music in my bedroom. And today we're going to do probably the most comprehensive video that I'm going to shoot. So we're going to be focused on the process, the techniques. I'll share plugins, but this isn't really about that so much as it is about the mindset and the steps that you want to follow to create a professional sounding metal mix from the very first step to the very last step. It's going to give you everything that you need to put all the pieces together that I struggled to put together when I was just getting started. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to start by telling you all the stages that I like to use in my approach, and then we're going to go through each one. So stage one is setup, and this is where you want to organize your project to give you maximum recall, maximum options later on, and save you time. Stage two is tone selection. This is where you're going to be picking the right sounds for your genre and your project. Stage three is core leveling, getting a rough balance of instruments. Stage four is bussing, grouping those instruments to give you more control and the ability to glue them in later. Stage five is track processing. That's where you're applying surgical detail to one rhythm guitar, to one drum, right? Stage six is bus processing, when you group those different levels of instruments together and you apply processing to all of them at once, which is going to give you cohesion. Stage seven is effects and atmosphere. This is when you're bringing space and depth to a project. And then stage eight is Mixbus and Final Polish. And this is where we're going to talk about the Mixbus plugins and also loudness and mastering and all of that good stuff. So this is a black metal project. It's for a band called Drop Stages. Knowing that it's black metal and knowing what I know about the artist, I'm going to make some decisions about how I set this project up, the sounds that I use, and everything else. So let's start at the very top with setup. I've already done some setup work here. We're not going to, the reason I didn't do it live on the video is it'd probably be very boring. It takes a while, but I'll just tell you what I've done is I've taken all of the like instruments and grouped them together. So down here, you can see my guitars. I have all my guitars grouped together. I know from listening to this track that the first four are my rhythm guitars. I have some lead tremolo guitars. I have some, solo guitars. Some people like to get really granular with the coloring and the labeling. I find that this level of detail works for me, but at a minimum, I want to make sure that they're all the same color. I can do that by selecting all of them and going in here and clicking assign track color. And then I want to select all the regions in each of these tracks and assign them the exact same color. It seems silly now, but it will save so much time later when you're hunting for that specific track you're working on. You want to be able to find it very quickly, right? So coloring regions by tracks lets me do that. Labeling these instruments in a way that works for me enables me to do that, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. You just want to do labeling that you know what it means so that it's very easy for you to remember exactly what's on a specific track. The other thing that I like to do in setup is specific to when there are MIDI drums, which is increasingly true for projects that I'm working on. And what I'm going to do with the MIDI drums here is let's take a listen to what we have first. Okay. So that definitely sounds like black metal. The problem with this MIDI drum track is that it's one MIDI track. And that means if I want to process it, the only way I can do that is as one track. And the reason that's important is because I might, in fact, I definitely want to apply different processing to my snare drum versus my kick drum and so forth. And when it's in this format, you can't do that. So during setup, what I like to do is make sure that I'm setting up multi-output routing. You can do this in all of the modern MIDI drum plugins. I'm using Superior Drummer 3. I know you can do this in Crim drums and all the stuff by Bogren Digital. So I'm going to select in this plugin multi-output. It's bringing me into the mixer here. And I've already set this up, but I'll show you exactly what I've done. So I'm looking at the mixer and I'm going to find all my kicks. And I'm going to send all those kicks to the same channel. So now I'm going to have a channel that's just kick. And then I can process that channel however I wish, right? And I did the same thing for my snares. Those are all going to the 3/4 channel. Hi-hats are going to 5/6. what's cool about MIDI drum programs is you can get this granular, right? You may not have 40 different microphones or however many drum mics you would need to replicate this in the studio. But with a MIDI track, you can process individual cymbals and get as granular as you like. So I tend to send all my toms to the same track for how I mix. I don't really hear a big difference in having individual processing on each individual tom. I do like to have my ride processed by itself, so I'm sending that to its own channel. Then I'm grouping my chinas together, I'm grouping my splashes together, I'm grouping my overhead mics together, and then I'm grouping all my room mics together. And specifically in Superior Drummer 3, if you are using Superior Drummer 3, you want to use these effects tracks as well. You can see there's some transient design that's kind of just built in here. I want to use that because it gives a nice crack to the snare, so I'm going to send those to the same channel as the snare, and I'm going to do the same thing with the kick. And what that's going to do is it's going to let me break this MIDI track up and process it independently. So now that I've routed everything, you'll see that those channels aren't visible. The next thing I have to do is actually create those channels in the DAW. So I'm going to go into my mixer, and I'm going to find my drums. Here they are. And you'll see that there's this little plus minus here. That's going to enable me to push out all those channels that I just created for where I'm sending those different drum mics. So I'm just going to click these all out. You can see it's generating channels, and because Logic is a huge pain in the ass, it's not happening right next to the channel I'm working on. But I've done this enough to know what these channels should be. So I know this first channel, remember, is where I sent my kick. The next one was where I sent my snare. Then I had my hi-hat, my toms, my ride, my china, my splash, my overheads, and my rooms. So now I have an auxiliary channel created for all those different drums. I just need to actually bring them into the project. So I'm going to highlight all of them and click Create Track. And you'll see now I have individual tracks for all these different parts of the kit. So if I hit play, great. So now I can process these drums independently. I can process the rest of my instruments independently because I have the DI tracks. I have them grouped by name, and I have them grouped by color. So I'm feeling good about my setup. And now I'm ready to move into stage 2, which is tone selection. I need to focus on finding the exact right tones for this genre. And generally speaking, as we move through these stages of processing, I'm always going to start with the drums, move to the bass, and then move to the guitar. I like to really, maybe because I'm a drummer, I like to focus on the backbone of the rhythm and really gluing that down first and then move to the guitars, even though the guitars are really going to carry the majority of the song structure. So I already picked a drum kit that I like, but you can do basically anything that you want in Superior Drummer 3. So this is a drum kit that I like. I'm using the Death and Darkness expansion pack, and I tinkered with it a little bit to kind of make my own kit, and I call that kit Drop Stages. I have that saved as a drop down. So every time I'm doing a new project or new song for this band, I can just instantly recall that drum kit. So I already have the drum sound that I like here. So what I'm going to do next is focus on the bass. And when I'm focusing on the bass, I always like to do this in the context of the kick drum, because the bass and the kick need to be bear hugging each other at all times and feel like they're kind of moving as a unit. So I'm just going to go ahead and solo the kick and the bass. And let's hear what that sounds like, because we just have the DI track for now. But what I'm going to use on my bass here is the Parallax X plugin. And the reason I love this plugin, let me just reset the default settings, is because it lets you do something that a lot of modern metal mixers will do manually in one plugin. And what that is independent bandpass bass processing. So what a lot of producers will do is they'll take the same exact DI track for the bass, they'll triple it, they'll apply one type of processing to the subs, on that first stem, they'll apply mid-range processing to the second one, and then they'll apply kind of high bite or grind processing to the third. And the reason I love Parallax is because you can do all three of these right in one place. So we're looking at the bass. I know how I'm going to dial this because I use this plugin a lot, and I kind of know what I'm going to do with this band. But what you can do is you can pick the range that you want to be focusing on, the sub-frequency processing, and you can even compress it, which is probably what you would do if you were doing it independently. So I like to compress it right around 60%. I like to have my high pass in here right around 250 hertz. I like to boost it a little bit. Let's hear what that sounds like. And I'll mute the mid and the high range frequencies here, and we'll just hear the sub and the kick together. So I can tell that that's going to roughly work. Once I apply EQ and compression later, I'm going to be able to glue those two sounds together, the kick drum and the sub frequencies on this bass. For the mid-range frequencies, I like this to be kind of grindy. I like to boost the mid-range a little bit, and I like to put the drive somewhere between maybe 40 and 60%. So let's give this a listen. Sounds close enough. Now let's go ahead and add that high range. And I know before I even play it that I'm going to want to move this high pass out to maybe 1.2. And I'm probably going to want to bring this drive down. Let's give it a listen. And see, I like to dial with the kick drum rolling so that I'm getting it in. Okay, close enough for now. We're going to get more of the processing done later. Last, I'm going to EQ this a little bit. So I like to bring up the low end, and I'll just play with these knobs a little bit until I get the sound I'm looking for here. That feels pretty good for my bass tone. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my guitar tone next. And I'm going to leave my bass and my kick drum still engaged here. And let's just make sure that I'm centered on this guitar track. I like to process guitar kind of track by track, and I like to keep it centered so that it's really clear in the stereo image exactly what the guitar sounds like. So I'm going to just pick a range and loop it here. And I'm going to use what I'm going to ultimately do with this is quad track it. And this is a very popular technique in modern metal. I have some other posts about how to quad track guitars that you can check out if you want to see the exact technique there. I'm going to breeze over that quickly because it is kind of its own beast. And we're just going to focus on picking tones that complement each other. So whether you have, two guitar tracks pan left and right, and you want them to be cohesive, or you have quad tracking where you're panning two pairs left and right, you want to make sure the tones are complementing each other. So I usually think of it in terms of high pairs of guitars and low pairs of guitars. I'm going to start with the high pair of guitars, which is going to be more focused on that bite between, the 1800, 2500 hertz range, and less focused on the low end. I'm going to get the low end for my other guitar. So the plugin that I really like for the high pair is a Fortin Nameless Suite. What I love about this plugin is you just open it up and it sounds good. See, it's already a good sounding amp. I am just going to dial this a little bit. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the dialing. I can do separate content on that. But suffice it to say, I'm going to go after a more scooped sound on the high pair that's got a lot of bite in the upper mids. And I'm going to balance that with a less scooped low pair later. So I'm just going to play with these knobs until I get the sound that I'm looking for here. I'm going to disengage all the pedals. And I'm just going to use the stock mics here for the cab in the interest of time. Usually on this high pair, I'm either going to do just a 57 for a ton of bite, or I'm going to do a 57 and a 121. And I like to have the 57 pretty close to the center here. Okay, that sounded pretty good. Let's mess with the EQ a little bit. Remember, this is the range I'm going to be most focused on with this pair. We're going to scoop a little bit here at 250. And I'll put the high pass pretty high on this pair. I might put it at 90 or even 100 because I'm going to be making up all that low end information with the other pair. No low pass on the high pair. I like to let all the crunch and hiss and all that good stuff stay in there. Personal taste thing. Okay, that sounded pretty good. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to copy that exact plugin, same settings and everything onto my second of this of the two guitars in this pair. And what I'm going to do to bring some differentiation in tone is I'm just going to pick a different set of mics on the same cab. Now that I have that in there, I'm starting to think that first guitar might be a little too woody. This is never an exact science, so I'm going to mess with this mic. I might even disable this 121 entirely to keep maximum bite here. There we go. Nothing wrong with 257s. So now I've got my tone on my drums, I've got my tone on my bass, I've got my tone on one pair of guitars. Let's get that second pair dialed in. And what I'm going to do is keep all of the historical context that I've already got here, the bass, the drums, and the other guitars, so that I can make sure that the sounds that I'm picking are fitting well with the other sounds. This is definitely best practice. There's a million ways that you can make a guitar sound amazing on its own, and the second you add everything else back in, it goes to garbage. So we don't want that to happen. We're going to keep all of these things processed together. So let's focus on that low pair now. And for this, I'm going to go with the Soldano. I like the Soldano because it's got a woody sound. It has a nice kind of round low end, and that's what I need to fill the gap in the low end information from that first pair. So now I'm just going to go ahead and dial the Soldano in. And remember, one of the things we did with our high pair is we scooped it. So I'm going to make sure that I have a healthy amount of mids on the low pair here so that I'm, really balancing that tone. I'm going to roll back on the treble a bit for the same reason. And you can kind of hear where they really start to fall into the pocket together, which is what we're looking for. All right, now let's pick some mics. I'll probably do the same pair since I'm already getting some darkness here. I can probably get there with a 57 and a 121. Okay, let's hit the EQ. Now, I'm not going to pay as much attention to the 2K here because that's where I want my first pair shining. I'm going to focus more down here in 500 and 1000. I pretty much always like 8K in my rhythm guitars, no matter which pair. I just find that it gives you a nice little sizzle on the top end. And for this one, we can deal with the high pass in the EQ plugin. We're going to do the opposite of what we did in the high pair. We're going to leave the high pass alone, and we're going to low pass this down, somewhere around maybe 10K. And that's going to protect those higher frequencies for the other pair to shine. So I can already hear that I'm getting some good glue with that tone. Let's just do the same thing. Let's take those settings from that guitar and apply them to the other guitar, and then we'll do the tweaking on the microphones in the cabinet. I do think I want that overdrive on, so let's go add that to the other guitar too. And I like to do a little bit of leveling and panning here because when I'm working on guitars, the tone to me is really influenced by where they sit in the stereo field. And generally what I'll do in a quad track situation like this one is I'll let that high pair really take center stage. I'll pan them wide. You can see I'm panned 100% to the left on guitar 1, 100% to the right on guitar 2. And I'm going, maybe 50% or 70% on the second pair. And I'm gonna have that second pair sit a little bit lower in level. And it should give me a nice, rich kind of wall of sound here. Let's see if we got it. Okay, that's starting to sound the way that I want it to. You'll notice that there's some imperfections in the tremolo here. You could quantize that, but this is black metal. I like to let those mistakes shine through. I want people hearing this to know that humans were playing it. So I'm happy now with how these guitars are sounding. Remember, we're going to do a lot more to them later. Let's check out these tremolos next. And my go-to for this is going to be the Rev C amp knob plugin by Bogren. These things are cool because they take all of the guesswork out of processing. They just give you one knob. So I like the Rev C tone for tremolo. Let's see, gain maybe at 50%. Let's see what that sounds like. Yep, that's what I'm looking for. Let's throw a Rev C on the second tremolo as well. But remember, I want tonal balance, so I don't want to keep the exact same cabinet. Little known trick on guitars is the cab is where most of the tonal difference comes from, not the amp. So I'm going to load a different cab in here. I'm going to use an impulse response where York Audio has mapped out a cab. I'm going to use the Mesa Boogie rectifier cab, and I'll probably go with the 57 and 121 mic. Let's see what these sound like all together now. Okay, starting to sound like black metal. Let's bring the rest of the drums in. Okay. We're starting to get there. I remember from the original listen through to this that these supporting guitars are pretty much just doing exactly the same thing as the tremolos. Sorry, not these two, but these bottom four definitely are. So I'm just going to copy exactly those settings and kind of stagger left and right here. Okay, there we go. Do the same thing down here. Well, let's just listen to that one little piece and make sure it doesn't sound insane. Okay, I'm okay with that for now. So now let's check out this pad. So I actually threw this pad on here. This is not rocket science at all. Let me just turn the rest of these off for a second. You can hear what this pad is doing. And what I like to do with pads is really, really straightforward when I'm looking for my tones. I'm just going to follow as, you know, loosely as possible the chord structure. Let's hear what that sounds like here. Okay, it's not sounding great right now. Let's mess with it. I like to use Serum for my synth. Serum gives you a lot of control. It's pretty user-friendly. So I'm going to show you how I dial this in Serum. Let's go to the initial preset. Okay, so I like to take the second preset here and throw a square in there. So you go to the basic shapes preset and then just move the wavetable position until you get the square wave. So now if you listen. Okay, so I'm going to bump the level up on that first preset. I'll bring the second one down to maybe like 40. Still sounds kind of funky. Let's add a couple voices here. Let's add a filter. Let's help that filter breathe a little bit. So I'm going to tinker a little bit with my LFO. Give it a little drive. Let's soften that breathing a little bit. Let's throw some noise. Let's give it a little more sustain and decay here. Okay, throw some distortion on it. If you want a ton of crunch, diode's good for that. Okay, I'm gonna put a tiny bit of phaser. Little. Maybe a tiny dash of chorus just to say we did. And then we'll throw some verb. And I'm cool with a lot of verb on my pads. So now we have, you know, pretty basic pad sound. We're going to process it more later. I'm going to use this to spin up 2 more pads here. So I'm just going to duplicate the track. I'm going to grab the exact same MIDI file, and let's get our sub. So we're going to call that our mid pad. Now let's hit our sub. And for the sub, let's not reinvent the wheel here. I'm going to take the exact same notes, drop them down into that sub frequency range. I'm going to get rid of all my extra unison here. I'm going to bring the cutoff way down. Actually, let's just go back to the initial preset here. And I'll throw the cutoff at right about 200 usually for these. Now we have a sub we can work with. Let's hear them together. All right, now let's do the opposite of what we just did and go higher for the high pad. And I like to have usually 3 pads layered, and I'm totally fine with them playing exactly the same notes. I really don't think that the pads need to be overly scientific. Pads are very present in modern metal. So I think you do want a strategy on your pad sound because it's going to give your mix that heft that you hear in a modern metal mix. So let's just dial this this high pad now. And I do like more stereo spread in the high pad. I like, you know, total mono right down the middle on the sub. And then up top, I like to add a little dimension. So. Okay. Let's throw some more voices in here and just have fun with it. You can obviously get a lot more specific than this, but I'm just showing you the steps that I take, so we're going to focus on speed here. So now we have 3 pads. Let's think about what we did. We picked our drum sound. We picked our bass sound. We have all of our guitar tracks. Oh, you know what? We forgot to do these solos. Let's hit these real quick. Let's see what we got. I think I want something a little dreamier here, so I like the Plini plug-in for that. And let's just see if there's a sound we like. Let's give it a little more verb there. Maybe a little chorus would be fun on this. And for the solo stuff, I'll high pass this pretty high. I'll go like 125, maybe even 150. And I'll low pass pretty low too. I might go down to like 7,000. Let's see. Because I want to keep the space there for my other instruments. I want to carve out a nice little landing pad for the lead. And I'm just going to copy this over. It sounds good enough to me for now. To the other one. And then we're going to do the same thing we've done on the other guitars and just change the microphone configuration here. We're starting to get somewhere. And now let's just, I think that's good for tone. Since all we really have left is vocals, we're going to shift now into stage 3, which is core leveling. So at this point in the process, I like to, before I do any track level processing, just listen to a couple key parts of the song and start to dial in my levels so that I'm getting consistent volume balance across the mix. So I'm just bring all these vocals in here. Pick a loop where we got everything going. Yeah, the vocals are going to sound silly before we get some of that track level processing on them, but it doesn't matter. We're just looking for balance here. Okay. Let's see what we got with the gang vocals. I think that snare's a little quiet and I'm maxed out there. So let's go into the mixer and just bring the faders up on the snare drums here. Get a little more juice out of the snare. That's more like it. Those pads are too heavy. If you want to do some, ambient black metal stuff, blast those pads. That's not really the sound we're after here, though. So at this stage, it shouldn't sound like a professional mix, but it should sound like the song is coming together. You should start to hear the instruments kind of fitting into their pockets. And that's the point of core leveling, because it gives you good context for everything you're going to do next. So now that I think we're close enough on the levels, let's start bussing this stuff up. And if you're not familiar, what bussing does is it basically takes individual tracks like these 3 pads that we have here. Just call that high pad so I remember what I'm doing. And it enables you to send all of them to one channel so that then you can manipulate that channel and process that channel independently. And There's a lot of really valuable reasons for doing that. I like to do it at this stage because it makes it very easy to say, turn all the pad sounds up at once or down at once, which is very helpful while you're leveling. So in Logic, to do that, you can just select the tracks that you want to bus, right click, click create track stack. You want a summing stack. That's going to give you a true bus that you can process. And I'm just going to call this pads bus. And I'm going to do that with the rest of these instruments. Usually I really don't go to a crazy level of detail here. I'll probably have a bus for the rhythm guitar. Okay. Let's get these tremolos on their own bus because I might want to turn all the tremolo up and or down depending on what I'm trying to do later. And then we have, you know, we'll call it lead or solo guitar bus. Now I can start making it easier to look at this project too, right? Like I can really just drill down into individual components. I'm going to probably put all my gang vocals on one bus so that I can process them independently from the rest of my vocals. And then the rest I'm just going to put in a Vox bus. And then what I'm going to do is combine, actually let's do it this way. I'm going to combine these two buses into one a cappella bus. This is going to be really helpful for me later. And, you know, now that I'm taking my time to do this in the busing stage of the processing, because one, when I'm printing this out, I'm going to want an a cappella track. You might want to do things with isolated vocals in the music video. If you're doing pop or something like that, you probably want just a backing track and just a vocal track if the singer's going to go on TV or something like that. But in this case, it's also just giving me the ability to turn all the vocals up and all the vocals down at once. So that level of control is really important to me, right? Now I'm going to just get my drum bus going. And I have a much simpler project to work with. I have more options and more control, and this is going to serve me really well later. That's why I like to hit busing early. It just sets you up for success later on when you're trying to tweak things in more of a global way and you want to hear what you're doing, right? So now that we're done with this, let's go to track level processing. And we're going to go back through the same cycle that I did for the other processing, and we're going to start with the drums first. So we're going to start with the kick, and I'm going to process the kick entirely by itself, and I'm going to build, you know, the house of the rest of this song off of that kick. So now that I have these bussed, I can just mute these all at once, which is nice. And let's see, do we have... All right, so here's what I'm going to do with the kick. By the way, there's a lot of different ways you can approach processing. Some people love to throw a preamp plugin on there. There's plugins that give you color and plugins that give you clarity, right? My personal style with modern metal is we're talking about messy, abrasive, loud in your face music already, tons of high gain. I don't want to add too much more color because it can get really muddy if you're not careful. So I'm going to be pursuing clarity with how I approach my track level processing on the drums. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with the kick and the snare. Then I'm going to jump over to the bass and the guitars, and then I'm going to come back and hit the rest of the drums. And that's going to give me the ability to see how all these things are fitting together in the context of kind of building up the house from its foundations first. So first on the kick, I'm going to hit it with some EQ, and I use Pro Q3 for most EQ. It's kind of the industry standard. It's just such an easy plugin to use and understand. And I'm going to cut out some of that low end rumble. I'll usually do the high pass around 25. A lot of modern metal producers are going to boost heavy down here in like the 40, 50, 60 hertz range. Gives you that chest thump in the kick. See, I don't really want that because what we're doing here is black metal. I don't want a super heavy low end. I want this to be a little more atmospheric and ethereal. So I'm not going to boost there, just so you know that's a tool that you have in your kit. And I know already this mix is going to get really thick. We're going to have, 8, 12 guitars playing at once. And I'm going to want this kick to cut through. So I'm going to boost somewhere here on the high end and give it a little of that top end punch. maybe like right there. And there's usually like a ping or kind of a boxy hit that you can sweep around up here and find in the middle. And I'm going to find that and take it out. We'll just take a little bit of that out. I think that's fine. Right after EQ, I'm always going to go to compression. For compression, also in the FabFilter family, I really like the Pro C2 plugin. I like this plugin because it's incredibly fast responding. You can catch transients really, really early with this plugin, same as you can with the 1176, which a lot of people love. The difference between this and the 1176, though, is this is like totally transparent, and that's what I'm looking for. So now is a good time to start thinking about the kind of kick sound that you want. And the first thing that I'll think about is how loud do I want that transient? Do I want this to be a punchy, hardcore, metalcore kind of kick that's really just pounding you in the chest? If that's what I want, I'm going to slow this attack down so that we're getting that heavy hit on the kick drum before the compressor takes effect. I happen to know from working on this project that I don't want that. I want it to stay very fast so that I don't have a lot of punch happening because, again, I don't want a real crazy low end on this song. Black metal, in my opinion, doesn't call for that. Ratio, I'm usually going to put this at 3 or 4. And then I'm going to play with the threshold. And, for the threshold, if you want an aggressive kick, if you do want punch, you might want to pay attention to this meter over here when we start playing. So that red bar is measuring how many decibels of gain reduction you're getting with this compressor. If you want a really aggressive kick, you want more gain reduction. You might want up to 10 decibels of gain reduction, which is going to look and sound like this. So you can hear more of that thump. And now watch, I'm going to ease off the attack and you'll hear even more of that transient coming in to give you more. For me in this project, I want less compression than that. And I want a really fast attack to make sure that the low end doesn't get crazy. So I'm going to bring it down to maybe like 5 decibels. Maybe like right around there. And for me, that's usually it for the kick drum. What you can do if you want a more aggressive kick is you can throw some saturation on there. A good plugin for that is Decapitator. Black Box is another good one. I'll just show you what that sounds like. It's going to give you more low-end punch. And if you use the same saturation on the kick drum as using the bass, it's going to give you some good glue between those two instruments. So I'd probably dial it like that if that's what I was looking for, but that's not what I'm after in this project. Let's go to the snare next. And I'm going to follow the same basic framework. Let's hit the EQ first. And first thing I'm going to do is make more space for the kick drum. There's a lot of low-end information. You can even see. So almost all the information from right about here and below is not relevant for the snare drum. All it's doing is crowding that low end and taking up space the kick should be taking up. So I'm just going to cut that out here with a high pass. I always am going to boost on that that transient. The transient's where you see that spike. It's usually going to be right around 200 hertz. Give it 1 or 2 decibels there. I'm going to look for that same kind of boxy ping in the middle that we heard on the kick, and I'm going to cut that out. Yeah, I don't want that sound in there. And then I'm also going to boost some of the top end so that I can cut through the guitar, same as I did with the kick. Maybe like 3,500 here. And for snare, I do like to throw a high shelf on there. I'll usually use Mag EQ4. This has a nice musical high shelf. So I'll start at either 5K or 10K and just kind of play with this gain dial until I hear some crack on the top. Okay, I'm liking what I'm hearing there. Now, same as with the kick, I'm going to hit compression next. I'm also going to use Pro C2. And there's a preset that I actually really like in here as a starting point called Snare Snap. And if you look at this visually, you can see what it's doing. It's giving that transient some room with a slower attack there. It's not clamping down right when the drum hits. And I'm going to dial this with maybe a little more gain reduction. I might go up to 8 or even 10 decibels in gain reduction on this. So I do like that crack. Let's just our leveling. And snare is a drum that I usually am going to put some saturation on right out of the gate. But rather than throwing Decapitator or Black Box or something like that on there, I'm actually going to go with a clipper. And what the clipper plugin is doing is it's shaving the top off of the peaks. Rather than compressing them and pushing them down, it's literally just chopping them off. And this nice kind of musical saturation sound happens when you do that. This is good for two reasons. It gives you nice color on the snare drum, and it also gives you a little more headroom by cutting those spikes in the loudness off. So I'm going to dial this a little bit. When you're dialing a clipper, keep an eye on your levels for the snare. Hopefully they should be cutting down by a decibel or two. And this plugin, just like the Pro C2 plugin, has a meter over here on the right that's going to show you kind of exactly where the gain reduction is. Okay, I think that's pretty good for now. So now let's go over to the bass, and let's see how the bass is fitting in with what we have on the kick and the snare. Okay, so it's starting to come together, but it isn't really glued in. It still sounds like the kick and the bass are not moving as a unit. I'm going to start with EQ right after parallax. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut out the low end information, which on the bass I might be cutting up to 40 or 60 hertz. Just making more room for that kick to sit next to the bass so they're not talking over each other. Same thing, I'm going to check the mids and see where the boxiness is that I don't want. Sweep for that and cut it out. Probably around there. And I want to boost this maybe at a 1,000 or 1,200 proactively because I know that I'm going to need that boost later on for this to shine through with the guitars. That feels right. And I'll usually put my low pass around 4,000 or 5,000 hertz. Let's see what we got. Remember, we're going to be boosting that snare with a high shelf and the rhythm guitars with a high shelf as well, and we're going to be very active in those high frequencies, so we want to carve some space for that with the bass here. That's why we're going to throw this high pass, or low pass rather, in here. Now, a classic modern metal mixing trick here is what we're going to do is we're going to side chain the bass and the kick together with compression. And we're going to set it up so that every time we're going to use multi-band compression so we can focus just on the low frequency range. And we're going to set it up so that the kick is pushing down the lower frequencies on the bass drum only when it's hitting. And that's going to glue these instruments together a little bit, help them kind of fit in together a little more seamlessly. So I'm going to use the multi-band compressor from FabFilter here. And I'm going to probably grab this range up to 100, 120. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to side chain this. So I'm going to find my kick, activate the side chain. So now the low end frequencies up to 110 or 113 hertz on the bass are going to get lightly pushed down when the kick is activated. And I'm going to try and dial this until I'm really only losing 1, maybe 2 decibels of gain at those moments. So let's just get that dialed, put the attack right on here, just let a little transient through, and then we'll mess with the release to find that kind of like breathing, natural feeling that we. Now you can really hear that those instruments are starting to play nicely. Let's hit it again. As you do more and more of these, you'll hear that there's glue happening there. Those instruments are starting to coexist really well. So that's what we want to happen. Now let's bring in the guitars and see how that's sounding. And we'll start with just the high pair here. Okay, I already know right off the bat that I'm going to want to do some EQ carving here. And you want to just kind of keep a mental model of where your frequencies are active and where they're not, so you can really fill in the gaps. And I like to occupy as much of the frequency spectrum as I can. So we have a lot of low end information now between the kick and the bass, which means I'm going to want to high pass this up pretty high. Like I said, for the high pair, I might go to 90. Let's see. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is focus on bringing out the bite, which is the goal of this high pair of guitars. And I'm going to sweep around in 1800, 2500 hertz to see if I can find the bite that I want. Okay, I'm liking that. To control the low mids, I usually like to do a dynamic EQ cut here. And what that means is this isn't going to cut the EQ by default. It's only going to cut the EQ when the volume of this particular frequency range hits a certain threshold. So we're just going to dial this a little bit. And we want to keep the runway clear of that low mid mud, because I can tell you right now it's going to pile up a lot, especially when we have 12 guitars in roughly the same frequency range. And I might do another very gentle cut right around here to make a little room for the bass. If you want to visualize these things together, a great thing about Pro Q3 is you can actually bring in a visual for the EQ of the bass while the guitar is playing, and you can see where the frequencies are at. So I can even get away with a little boost here because, as you can see, the guitar frequency is so or the bass frequency is so scooped that it's not particularly active here. And what I'm going to want to do is, in exchange, probably dip a little bit here where the bass is spiking. Keep an eye on the meter at right. You want to make sure you're not clipping there. So bring down maybe a decibel. And we can make that up over here in the track. So you can hear the bass and the guitar next to each other pretty nicely there. And then, like I said, I'm going to do an air shelf here and boost somewhere around 7,000 to 9,000, a decibel, maybe 2, just to give it a little sizzle. And they say to mix with your ears, not your eyes, but it's hard to ignore how these frequencies are clicking together. I'm going to hit play one more time and just look at what the red curve is doing. You'll see that the bass is really loud under the high pass here, which is what we want, and that after the high pass, the rhythm guitar is picking up the slack. You can see it in those two peaks, and that's what you want. When you hear a really good rhythm guitar sound, a lot of that is actually the bass guitar under the rhythm guitar, the two of them kind of fitting together. So, you know, others do this differently. I'm literally just going to copy exactly the same EQ curve over to the second guitar on this pair. Let's give that a listen with both of them active and panned. Okay, sounds good to me. If you're not getting enough bite, you can also add saturation here, and I'll usually use black box. Just show you what the before and after on that's going to look like. So you can hear it's very subtle, but it's giving it a little more cut. Maybe we'll leave that in there just so we can see what it sounds like at the end. And if it winds up sounding too mushy, we'll know that it's probably because we threw the saturation in there, but still valuable. So let's do it for the learning. And now we're going to apply all the same principles to that second pair. So with the second pair, we're going to focus on different frequencies. We're not going to focus on scooping. We're not going to focus on the 8,000 hertz and above range. We're going to handle it a little differently. So I'm just going to bring this up in volume so we can hear how it's sitting. And then we're going to play with the EQ a little bit. So my high pass is going to be lower. We're going to try and land this right in between the bass and the rhythm guitar. I'll usually boost somewhere in the middle here to bring out some of the woodiness on this low pass. Let's hit the low pass, you know, somewhere around here. Let's see where it sounds like at 9. Okay, and I'll do a little taming of the low mids. I can hear that it's already getting a little muddy, but we don't want to go as crazy here because we're not after that scoops. Okay, let's throw that on the other guitar. And then let's just, for the sake of the exercise, throw some saturation here, but let's focus on lower frequencies with the saturation on the low pair than we did on the high pair. So I'm going to grab that black box plugin again. See, I'm dialing it to the low frequency range. And I might give it a bump on the pentatone. There, I like how that sounds. Okay, it's coming together. I can hear that the bass low mids and the rhythm guitar low mids are kind of cluttered. We're going to fix that later with bus processing. Let's just leave it for now. And we're going to go now through the rest of the drum kit and get this processed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group the cymbals and the standalone cymbals here. So if you have any spot mics on your cymbals, I like to just throw those all on one bus. You're going to wind up processing them pretty similarly. And I don't really go very crazy with cymbals. I'll probably just throw some EQ on here, and I'm gonna cut up to maybe like 400 hertz, somewhere higher than you would think on these cymbals. And we're just taking all that low end clutter out because the cymbals are really only going to be active in the higher end frequency. Okay, I'm hearing a little bit of harshness here. So if you hear cymbal harshness, you can sweep around in here around like 3,000 to 6,000. Listen for something harsh, you know, spike really high till you can find it, sweep around, and then just cut it out a little bit. Yeah, right about there. I'm just going to dip that a little bit. Okay, and now I'm going to throw an air shelf on here just to give them some high-end sizzle on these cymbals. I'm going to use Mag EQ4 again. I'm probably going to start around 10. You can really hear it in the hi-hats. Watch, I'm going to do it before and after. So you get that nice crisp high end on the hi-hats. That's what I like. And I like to see this level peaking right around halfway on the fader here. Sounds like hi-hat's a little hot. Let's bring the ride up a little bit. China's down a little bit. Splash down a little bit. Okay, on the overhead mics, I'm probably just going to do EQ as well. Most people like to compress here. I really try to be gentle with compression. I think it's really easy to overdo it. And when you're doing your overheads, remember that you want to capture that kick drum and snare drum information. So for the overhead bus here, I'm going to be putting a high pass still pretty low, maybe around like 30. If you're not getting a lot of snare cutting through, you can boost on the overhead bus as well because that's capturing the snare. I'm okay with mine though. Let's cut the middle out because we're going to have that same boxy. That sound is the sound that you do not want. Let's see if we're getting cymbal harshness up here, because the overheads are capturing everybody. If we had harshness on the cymbal bus, we might have it here too. Yeah, that whistly top end sound. Let's just cut that out, that resonance, and then we'll give this an air shelf too, because this is going to wind up being such a dark mix. But with modern black metal, some high-end information is actually desirable versus, you know, the old days of having just so dark it's almost impossible to hear what's happening. So let's give it like 1 or 2 decibel bump at the 10K. Feels about right to me. And for the rooms, you notice we've been pretty gentle with compression. I like to slam the room. So I'm going to EQ this similar to how I did the overhead. So you don't want to make cuts just because you feel like it. I swept around up here. I'm not hearing that cymbal resonance, so I'm just going to ignore it. And maybe we'll just throw a little boost here at the high end as well. Very little. Okay, now let's slam this room bus. I like Distressor for the rooms. I don't really know why. It's just the one that I like. Distressor is great because it has the ability to apply saturation and color using these Distortion 2 and Distortion 3 settings, but you can also keep it really simple and have a really transparent compression, and that's what I'm going to look for here with the rooms. And like I said, I'm going to smash these. I might get to 12 or 14 decibels in gain reduction. So look at the meter here, and let's just see where we're hitting. I'm going to bring the attack all the way down to 0, so that we're just hitting we're clamping down before the transient even takes effect. And then we'll just roll the attack up a little bit until I hear the snare. It feels good. Release at 5. Okay, and I like to have my overheads peaking around 50%, 70% on the fader. I like my rooms, 50% or less. Maybe peaking at like 21, maybe 19, minus 21, minus 19. Yeah, you can see 19. That feels pretty good to me. Oh, forgot about the toms. Let's hit the toms. I don't spend a ton of time on the toms because for the kind of metal I'm mixing, they're just not as prominent or important. So I like to do kind of broad strokes on the toms. We'll just throw some EQ. Find a tom heavy set. So I'm going to boost the fundamental. Take out the boxy. And then boost some of the crack up here. That's fine. I do like to compress them a little bit more. So let's go ahead and use Distressor for this too. So rather than using a 4-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio like I'm using on the kick and the snare, I'm going to use 6-to-1 here. Little bit of transient coming through, probably 5 and 5 for attack and release. And let's get the gain reduction, around like minus 10. Okay, a little loud, but that is the right level. And I notice sometimes toms have a little bit of trouble poking through, so they're another good candidate for a little saturation. Anywhere you want something to pop its head out just a little bit, we can throw some saturation on there. So we'll put some black box. All right. So let's go over to our pads. What we're going to do with the pads is we're going to carve out very even distributions of frequencies across these 3 pads. I have a sub pad that I want just active in the low frequencies, a mid pad I want just active in the mids, and a high pad I want just active in the highs. So I pretty much do this exactly the same every time. I'm going to cut everything out except for 0 to 200 on the sub. I'm going to cut everything out except for 200 to 1000 on the mid. And then I'm going to cut everything out below 1000 on the high. So they're just slotting neatly into their individual regions and taking up the full frequency spectrum with this pad bus. So let's go ahead and just dial these EQs. we got the sub is really only active up to 200 hertz, and that's where we're going to start with the mid pad. And I'm going to go ahead and low pass everything above 1,000 and just focus on the mid-range frequencies with this pad. And we're going to see I'm probably going to have to dip a little bit here to avoid low-mid clutter. We don't want it to be super audible in modern metal. We just want it thickening the. Okay, it feels good to me. Now let's cut everything below 1,000 on the high pad. So each one is kind of tucked into its little home here. I'll usually put a dip in the bite zone of the guitar because I want to make some space for those rhythm guitars to cut through. So let's find that. Maybe we'll do a low pass here too, since we have that high shelf on the rhythm guitars and we want people to hear. So it's very subtle. Let's just hear what it sounds like with the pads engaged versus not. See, all it's doing is filling in the gaps, putting a little glue in between the bricks of the songs, which is what I like my pad bus to be doing. So I'm feeling good about the track processing on the pads. Now let's hit the vocals. You could spend an hour talking just about how to process the vocals. I'm going to give you a quick crash course in how I would do this. So let's get the main vocal bus going, and let's start with just the lead vocals. I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to EQ first and just cut out the nasal stuff, cut out the low, mid, boom, and boost in the range that I think is best at cutting through. I know for this one, it's going to be somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200. So I'm going to cut up to like 100 here. You can hear that boxiness. I don't want that boxiness, so let's get that out. So it literally sounds like you're screaming in a cardboard box. It's sounding a little harsh, which is going to be somewhere over here, like 3,500 to 4,000. Let's dip a little there. And I'm going to throw a boost right where I know the core of this vocal is, and it feels to me like it's right around here. You'll notice that there's a spike happening over here too if you want. See, it's jumping on that K sound. That's a sibilant. I don't want those to jump quite as much. So to catch those sibilants, I'm going to throw a dynamic cut here. So again, it's only going to cut when that K sound is jumping out. Let's hear it without. Let's hear it with. Yeah, so we're just taming that sibilant. Let's hit it now with some compression. I like to use distressor on the lead vocals here as well, and I'm going to do a 4-to-1 here, more gentle compression on the lead vocal. I want it to be peaking around maybe 5 to 7 decibels of gain reduction. I don't worry about the transients on the vocals. I want to go ahead and compress this right out of the gate, so I'm going to drop the attack all the way to 0. We'll keep the release around 5. And we're going to avoid low-end detection here and really just focus on compression when that mid-range is active. Right around there feels good. And we're going to do 2 levels of compression here. This is what you're going to hear on, Billie Eilish and pop singers like that too. Or this is a very popular approach for them. You do some kind of heavy duty compression up front. The distressor is doing the heavy lifting here, and you follow it with the LA2A compressor. This is a gentler compressor. It's slower. It's a lot more musical. This is really just the leather on the seats, so to speak. It's not doing the heavy lifting, but it's adding a nice tonal quality. So what I'm going to look for here is really just 2 decibels of gain reduction. This is really just here for color since we already have a lot of compression with the distressor. Okay, and I'm definitely going to throw some saturation on the lead vocal here. Let's hear what that sounds like. You should be hearing a difference already. Let's solo just that. All hail the husk of man, take an aim, obey commands. Starting to sound like black metal. All right, so all we have left to take care of at the track level now is the backup vocals and the gang vocals, and you can do these pretty quick usually. So I'm throwing an EQ here on the first set of backup vocals, and I'm going to find a kind of processing that I like, and I'm really just going to replicate that across the rest of the backup vocals because I want them to kind of move as a unit and just reinforce the lead vocals. So to do that, let me just reset here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to box them in a little bit more. So I'm going to push the high pass higher than I have a high pass in the lead vocals and move the low pass lower. Probably start the low pass around 10K and just drag it down until I hear these backup vocals moving into the background. We'll mute the lead vocals so we can hear what that is doing here. You can hear as I move further to the left that we're pushing these vocals back. I'm going to dip right around here because I know that that's where my lead vocals are most active. Let's unmute them so we can hear. You can hear how those lead vocals are really poking through. Little harshness there I'm going to take out. Okay, I think that's fine. And I'm really going to smash the backup vocals with compression. So I'm going to take the ratio and distressor up to 10 here. I'm going to have super fast attack, and I'm going to go to 10 dB gain reduction, maybe even higher, just to really, drill these into place. And how these fit in the mix is going to become a lot more apparent when we get to the wet effects and start playing with reverb. But I know from working on mixes like this one that I'm going to be happy with where that's sitting. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that same processing and apply it across the rest of these backup vocal tracks. And if I had more time, I would be digging in here and, probably spending a little more time to process them independently. But since we're doing this entire song start to finish, I'm just going to cheat a little bit in the interest of time, and it's not going to sound bad. Let's see. It's good. Spot where we got all of them. And I like to have the pair that's less frequent in here panned a bit wider. This is going to give you that kind of like wrapped in vocals, like enveloped in black metal sound that I really like. Definitely moving in the right direction. Let's do the same thing on the gang vocals. With the gang vocals, I'm going to basically follow the same principle, maybe push them back a little bit further. I'm going to find some EQ that I like, compress them heavily, and then copy paste like I just did with the backup vocals. Let's make that a little more audible. And this is, again, how you push vocals back is an easy place to start there is where you have the low pass. I'm going to bring it pretty far down here to really just push these gang vocals. Okay, I think that's good. Let's hit it with the distressor. I'm going to go 10 to 1, aggressive gain reduction, just like I did the backup vocals before. Okay, I think that's fine. Let's paste these out over the rest of the tracks. Okay, now I got track processing for all the gang vocals. I'm just going to pan these out. And I kind of just do this in such a way that we're taking up as much of the stereo field as we can. So I'll do light pan all the way into hard pan for the gang vocals. Let's just see how that sounds. Sounds pretty gang vocally to me. So that's the end of track level processing. We can now move into the next stage of mixing. And if it feels like that took forever, that's usually where the majority of my time is going to go. I like to really do mixing from the ground up, not from the top down. And I'm okay spending a little extra time on the tracks if it means I'm going to spend less time on the mix bus and things like that later, trying to correct mistakes, right? So track processing is done. We can now move into bus processing. That's stage 6 in our process. And the point of bus processing is really just to start giving your mix cohesion, start to glue the component parts together so that they feel like are a part of the same song. So to start here, I'm going to kick it off with the drum bus. I have some stuff left over here. Let's just delete that so I can show you what I do. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do with the drum bus, let's find a meaty drum section that we can use to process. Okay, that feels good. I'm going to throw some EQ on here, really gentle. Just probably all I'm going to do is take out the rumble below 25. Let's just see if we have any leftover harshness in the cymbals. Little resonance right there that we'll take out. Nothing crazy. Maybe I'll throw an air shelf if I want to bring out a little more of the sizzle on the cymbals. So we'll pull up the mag EQ again, and I'm probably going to take it all the way up to 20 hertz and just play around with this. So I want there to be some sizzle on the cymbals, but I don't want them overwhelming. So I put in the air shelf to bring out the cymbals and then dip the cymbal levels a little bit. So my favorite bus compressor of all time is the API 2500. And this thing is especially good on the drum bus. So I'm going to pull this up. For the drum bus, I'll usually start with the old tone type. That's going to, keep a lot of the crack on the snare in there, which I like. And I'll do a medium on the thrust detector and a medium on the knee. Attack, for bus compression, you want to be really gentle. You want to be in the 1 to 3 decibels of gain reduction range. And you want to really let the transients in too. You want to be gentle because we're not trying to actually compress this really. We're just trying to glue it, create like processing using the compressor so the drums feel like they're moving as a unit, like they're all in the same room. So that means typically really long attack. So it's a while before the compressor kicks in, and really fast release. So I have the release on the fastest setting so that the compressor lets go very quickly. I also want to be gentle with the ratio for drum bus. I'll probably do 3:1. And I'm going to play with this threshold knob until you hear the drums just kind of snap together with each other. And you should be able to hear this in the headphones if you give it a listen here. So I'm hearing it at about 2 decibels in gain reduction. That's usually, in this case, exactly what I'm looking for on the drum bus. It just sounds now like it's moving as a unit, right? Let's bring in the bass. We don't have a bass bus. We just have the track. So we're just going to turn this on to hear how it's sounding. Good opportunity to re-level the bass, just make sure it's sounding good with the drums. And for the drum bus, I want this peaking around -3 dB. So it's probably a little quiet. Let's get it up to -3 dB. Yeah, somewhere around there. Now bring up the bass a little bit. You can hear right at that level, the bass and the kick are kind of blending. That's what you want. Now let's process the rhythm guitar bus. So first thing I'm going to do here is some light EQ cleanup. Let's high pass this, maybe around 70. And I want to bring out some of that snarling bite here. So I'm going to take the whole bus, and when you're doing bus processing, you want to be doing really wide EQ boosts and really narrow EQ dips so that you're not contorting the core sound too much. Pretty happy with it there. Let's maybe throw a dynamic EQ right in the low mids just to keep some of the mud out. So this is just going to push it down when it gets too loud. I'm going to do a little bump here in the 700s just to catch the beef in the lower pair of the guitar. And I might even boost a high shelf on the entire rhythm bus here too, to just kind of make it pop a little bit. Feeling pretty good about that. We might have a little overlap in the bass, so let's just pull the bass into the visualizer here and see what's going on. Yeah, you can see right there at 130 hertz, the frequency of the rhythm guitar is completely overlapping with the frequency of the. So what I'm going to do here is sidechain EQ. I'm going to put a very narrow dynamic dip here, and I'm going to sidechain this to the bass. So let's find the bass. Activate the sidechain. So this is just going to free this zone up when the bass is present, and it should glue those two instruments together a little bit better. This is the idea with bus processing. Might want to do the same thing over here where the grind on the bass guitar is. Just to bring it forward a little bit, let it punch through that wall of guitars. That sounds good to me. I'm hearing the bass pretty clearly. The other thing you can do with the rhythm guitars, you notice I haven't put any compression on any guitars at all yet. I like to be extremely gentle with compression on electric guitar because high gain guitars are already compressed. When you have a lot of saturation, it is already trimming the peaks off of the dynamic range. So all I'm doing here is gluing it, right? Trying to just kind of tuck it in a tiny bit. I'm going to do that with really gentle compression. So probably do like a 2-to-1 ratio, relatively fast attack. And I'm going to play with this threshold knob just until I'm barely seeing gain reduction. Definitely no more than 1 decibel. And because the goal is not really to compress, it's just to tighten, right? Now, that feels right, but the guitars are a little hot. Let's bring them down. And you can hear, I'm going to turn it off and then turn it back on. What it's doing is it's giving a little more articulation to the pick attack and just kind of bringing the guitars forward a little bit. Okay, feeling good about that. Now let's go over to the tremolos. The other thing you can do, and maybe we'll do it for the sake of doing it here, is you can throw some saturation on the rhythm guitar bus. I like to differentiate the saturation at the bus level so that I'm capturing tonal balance. So what I'm going to do on the rhythm guitars, which are supposed to sit at lower frequencies, is I'm going to put some tape saturation. For tape saturation, I really like the Slate Digital virtual tape machines. I'm going to be really gentle with the saturation and just look and see what this. So you can hear the rhythm guitars pop just a little bit in the low end. I'll do it one more time. And I really like how that's sounding. I might not have to do very much on this tremolo bus at all. But what I'm going to do with the tremolos is I want them to be poking through in the frequencies that really matter, but not cluttering anything else. So I'm going to give them a pretty high pass here and a pretty low pass. Might bring the low pass down to 6 and change. Let's see how that is. Dip some low mid. And I want to bring out the body of these tremolos, not quite in the bite range. I want this to be a little creamier, a little more lead guitar sounding, so I'm going to probably find that around here. Yep, that feels good. Just hit this with a little saturation, and I want to differentiate from the tone of that tape saturation, so I'm going to go with black box, and I'm going to focus on the high frequency ranges here. Yep, And I like how those are fitting together. Now we're going to get to a really crowded guitar section here. So I know right away that I'm going to have to find a way to carve some space for these lead guitars, because we have the rhythm guitars really heavy in the bite zone, 2,000 to 2,500. We have the tremolos really heavy in the 1,500 to 2,000 range. So there isn't a lot of room for these leads. So let's go ahead and throw low pass, high pass in here. Same basic rule of thumb as the tremolo. And you can hear that they don't really have much room to maneuver here. So let's boost them a bit and give them some space. Dip some low mid. For the lead bus, sometimes you can find a little pocket of clarity right around here. Let's see if we have that. I think we got something there. Let's bring them up a little bit. So I'm getting there, but I'm still not getting the clarity that I want. The way I'm going to deal with this is with sidechain EQ. So I know I have some overlap right around here, say 1400. So I'm going to sidechain the tremolos to the lead guitar bus and make some space only when the lead guitar bus is active. So we're not going to mess with the processing for the entire track. Let's just see what that does. Okay, I think we're going to have to do the exact same thing over here on the rhythm bus. Let's throw that in there. Maybe a little too creamy there. Let's get some saturation to give these lead guitars some bite. You can really hear how they're pushing down those other guitars, and I'm okay with that for this part of the song. I think I want to give them, center stage. It's a very brief period in the overall song. Okay, let's move to the pads bus, and this is where I'm going to do most of the carving for the pads, since we already kind of have them fitting together like puzzle pieces. I know I have a sub, so I'm just going to clear up some low, take out some of the high end, keep some space there for the guitars. Let's give the guitar some room to bite in here. Pick an area where we don't have the leads going. Dip some low. I want to do the same exact sidechain compression on my pads to take care of the sub overlap with the kick drum that I did on the kick drum and the bass. So right now the sub frequencies of the pad and the kick drum are kind of stepping on each other's toes, and it's more important to hear the kick. So I'm going to sidechain the pads bus to the kick and give it 1 or 2 decibels of gain. Maybe bring that kick up a little bit in level. And it's subtle, but you can hear more kick with the sidechain engaged. Here it is disengaged, and then I'll turn it on. Poking through that sub a little bit better. Okay. Now let's move over to the vocal bus. We'll start with our primary vocal bus, and then we'll deal with the acapella. I'm not going to do a lot here. Some EQ cleanup. Boost a little here for articulation. See some boxiness building up here. Watch when I boost this, you'll hear. Let's get that out. And we'll do a dynamic dip here to take care of those S's and K's. Okay, that sounded pretty good to me. For the cherry on top, we'll throw Soothe 2. If there's one plugin that I do really endorse, this is the one. It's just going to automatically find those whistly resonances and take them out. And I want to be really gentle with this because it's black metal. I don't want it too polished. You can see where it's dipping out those resonant frequencies there. Here's what it sounds like if I just solo what it's taking. Yeah, that's stuff that we don't want in there. So that takes care of EQ. And then I'm going to do my bus compression at the acapella level because that, by processing the vocal bus and the gang vocals the same way, we're going to glue those together. So all I'm going to do at this level is a little bit of saturation. I'll probably use tape again. And just a little bit just to add some heft. Forgot to take off Soothe, or take off the, this guy. What came and hit my eye? I got some trash better to work. You'll notice with the levels, I don't want to be overwhelming the song with the vocals. That's not how black metal works. It should kind of be tucked into the fabric of the song. The saturation is helping stick it in. Let's check out the gang bus. Same quick EQ stuff. Some Soothe. And I really want to lock these gang vocals in place. I'm actually going to put some compression on this bus that I did not put on the other vocal bus. We're going to be gentle. 3:1 on the ratio, 1 to 3 dB of gain reduction with a fast. And the way we're going to tuck these back further later is with the wet effects. So I think we're good. Oh, let's hit the acapella bus real quick. I think all I'm going to do here is glue all these vocals together with the old standby, the API 2500. Very long attack, very fast release, 2:1 ratio, very gentle, 1 decibel gain reduction probably, or maybe 2. We're just looking for the moment that the vocals sound like they just kind of glue in. And you should be able to hear that here. I'm hearing it right about. Let's bring that snare down a little. Okay, I'm feeling good about our bus processing. So let's move on to stage 7. This is where we're going to start throwing in the wet effects, the effects and atmosphere stage. And what we're doing here is we're bringing space and depth to the mix. We're going to start with the drums again. And the only track that I like to process independently here is the snare. And what I'm doing with the snare here, I never put reverb or delay or any of those wet effects on the actual track. I'm always going to use an auxiliary send like I'm doing here. So I'm sending this audio signal out to another channel that has its own independent processing. And what that does is it enables you to have the punch and clarity of this vocal track or the snare track or the drum track, whatever it is, exactly as it is. And then you get the reverb tail or the delay tail after. If you have them all sitting on the track, it gets kind of soupy really fast. So I love Valhalla Vintage Verb for this. I'm using, I think, an ambience here. Yep, ambience, cross stick room. Something gentle, just 0.4 seconds of delay. Since it's an aux send, we can go to 100% on the mix. And I'm just going to dial this in until we start to hear some of that snare. Like it right about there. And I'm doing the same thing here at the bus level with the drum. So I'm sending the snare itself goes out to one reverb. The entire drum bus is going out to another reverb. It's a subtle one. It's a, very short ambience. There's a preset that I like called drum air, and it is doing exactly what it sounds like. It's just putting some air on this drum kit so it sounds like you're in the room. So we'll dial that into taste. See, those sound like real drums to me. We've taken the MIDI drums and we've brought them into a live room. A lot of producers are trying to do the opposite, trying to get a really mechanical sound out of the drum kit. I like it to feel really organic, and the wet effects are helping us get that with the reverbs. Okay, I think that's good for drums. Let's do the vocals. This can take some time, so I'm just going to move quickly through it. I already have some send set up here, but basically for every vocal track, I have one long reverb send, one short reverb send. So my long reverb send has about a 4-second decay. My short reverb send has about a 1-second decay. And then I'm also going to throw some quarter note delay in there. Quarter note delay with varying levels of reverbs on the sends is how you get that kind of like demonic in a cavern lead vocal sound that I like so much. And
call my friends. One came and licked my hand.
And it's really up to you how demonic you want to get. For all of the backups, I'm just cutting out the delay. I think when you stack too much delay up, it gets overwhelming. And then I'm sending to the long and short reverb. And what should happen when we hear all these together is we should really hear that black metal banshee wail that we love.
A scuff man, take an E.
So I'm pretty happy with that. Let's hear it in context. If you want to take it one final step further, what you can do is at the acapella bus level, you could do one more send. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to send this. Where did I send the drums? Bus 49. So I'm going to go ahead and send my vocals to exactly the same reverb channel as my drums. And that's just going to help glue those together, help bring them into the same room, so to speak. So let's see how that's. Pretty happy with that. Let's throw the gang vocals processing on, see how that's sounding. I think we can brighten that up a tiny bit. Okay, that feels pretty good to me. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with the bass. You see I'm sending to bus 49, and the rhythm guitar is also sending to bus 49. So now I have my bass, my rhythm guitar, my drums, and my vocals all getting processed identically by the same reverb send. And that's going to further that kind of in-the-room feel that I'm looking for. Again, I want to be creating live and organic feeling in this DI and MIDI. Maybe a little muddiness in the rhythm guitars. Let's dip a little bit here in the low mids. Okay. Bring them down. now I got my wet effects more or less dialed in. It's only now, once I'm feeling pretty good about the song as a whole, that I'm going to jump into the mix bus. And like I said before, a lot of mixers like to start with the mix bus and mix into the plugins they know they like on the mix bus. I don't like doing that. I think it reinforces bad habits at the track level and kind of smooths over mistakes that you have to go back and fix. So I'm going to start building my mix bus now. This is stage 8. We're just going to be filling out our mix bus with plugins to get that kind of final polish and take what sounds kind of like a raw demo and turn it into a professional metal track. So first plugin is going to be EQ. I'm just going to take out some rumble, and I'm going to see if there's some aggression I want to bring out in here in the 1500, 2500 hertz range, and if there's any mud that I need to take out down in the low. Aggression, a little mud cleanup. I'm almost always going to throw an air shelf in here next, just to kind of bring some musicality to the top end, brighten it up a little bit. Same plugin as before, now on the mix bus, Mag EQ4. We'll start it at 10K and play with the sounding good. Let's see if we need it. I'll usually throw a multi-band compressor on here just to kind of take out a little more mud. Really, really gentle on the So you can hear a little build up there, especially in the rhythm guitars. This is just going to take a tiny bit off the top of that to take the mud out. So I'm going to follow that with saturation. You could use transformer style saturation like True Iron, which I really like. In this case, I'm going to stick with tape because I like what that's doing on this mix. And a little goes a long way here. So let's dial it low, start bypass, engage it. And we should hear those rhythm guitars snap further into focus and a little bit of aggression here. Yep, happy with that. Next, I'm going to throw the unfiltered audio basement, and this is low-end processing. Low-end is where a lot of mix buses kind of fall apart, and what this does is it applies gentle saturation to just kind of clarify the low end. So I'm going to be gentle with this. Let's dial up the strength first, then we'll dial in the clarity, and then we'll see if we want to boost the low end by half a dB. Listen to when I dial up the clarity, you'll hear the bass and the kick drum really just snap into focus. Watch here. Like it right about there. This is a pretty beefy low end. I might even back off of it a little bit. Okay. Now I have a nice tight low end here. Right after that, I'm going to go to some stereo imaging. This is probably the only Ozone plugin that I'm going to use. I think that their stereo imaging is really nice. And all I'm going to do is just let this grab the frequency band. So I'm going to hit play and click learn. It's going to find the bands that it thinks I should be focusing on, and then I'll tweak from there. I always like to just focus my stereo image at 100 to 120 below in the low end, and I'm going to drag this knob down and make that basically entirely mono. So right down the center. usually leave the second band here alone. Maybe I'll pull this up a little bit, and I'll give just a touch of widening to this 1K to 10K band. And then I'll do most of the widening at just the high end 10K. Dial up the stereo, recover sides. This is giving a nice wide, ethereal kind of top end to this black metal mix, which is exactly what I want. You can already hear this thing snapping into focus and getting a little more clarity, which is great. Next, I'm going to throw Golfos on here. This is some kind of AI machine learning driven dynamic EQ. And all I know is what I've learned from others, which is that if I put recover around 15 and tame around 5 to 10, it's just going to snap another 2 to 5% of clarity into the mix. Very subtle, but definitely worth doing. And then we're going to cap it off with the last bus compressor. And I'm going to be absolutely extremely gentle here. Slowest attack, fastest release, 2-to-1 ratio, max 1 dB gain reduction. And this is just to glue the entire mix together. I'm happy with it there. So this is now a mixed song. What it isn't is mastered. For mastering here, all I'm going to do is try to bring this in line with kind of radio caliber loudness. Let's target, in this case, maybe minus 14 LUFS, which is going to put this in exactly the right loudness range for streaming platforms like Spotify. I use this plugin to kind of gauge what the loudness is going to be, and I'm targeting an integrated LUFS of minus 14. So you can see we're a little hot there, and we probably have a little bit too much dynamics here, impacting our ability to achieve loudness. So I'm going to throw a limiter on, and all I'm trying to do is bring a little less dynamic range to this, so we have a little bit thicker song, a little bit more loudness, and I'm going to tinker with the peak of the output of this limiter to bring it in line with that Spotify level streaming minus 14 LUFS loudness. So I just like to bump this limiter until we're seeing a couple peaks, never anything more than 2 dB of gain reduction. And I've brought the output gain down by about 2 decibels. And let's see if that is putting us in the right LUFS. So that may not be exactly right, because really technically you have to let the entire song play out in order to see what the true integrated LUFS level is. But I'm feeling pretty happy with where we got to in this mix. We've gone through every stage of mixing, and then the last stage of gentle mastering with a limiter. And just to recap, stage 1 here, setup. We organized this song so the project was ready for us to attack. We grouped individual instruments together by color and label. Stage 2, we selected our tones. Drum, bass, guitar, pads after that. Stage 4, we bust those tracks together so that we could process them as a group. After that, we drilled down to the track level in stage 5 and processed them independently. We then processed the buses. We then applied the wet effects and atmosphere, and we've now gone through all the Mixbus plugins. The last thing that I didn't do that I probably would do otherwise before I apply the mastering is just find opportunities for 808s, glitchy sounds, things like that to bring this mix to life. But I think we covered enough ground for today. So hopefully you found that informative. Comment if there's a specific area you want me to double click on. But we went from 0 to a decently mixed song in, however long, 120 minutes. So thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for more studio tips and follow along with Very Friendly. Thanks. Bye-bye.